Does God still speak to us today? You know, the truth is, if you read through the scriptures, we see story after story of God speaking to people and people hearing God's voice and then people responding to that voice. And I get it. It's easy to say, yeah, but Pastor, that was way back then, and that's how God operated back then, and that's how the world was. But now we're here, and that's just not the way God works anymore. To which, when I hear those comments, I always want to respond, well, then please do tell me, how does God work today then? Does God still speak to us today? Now, according to my 3-year-old son, Breck, the one who was just throwing a fit up here a minute ago, that boy, according to him, the answer to that question is an emphatic yes. And here's how it went down. Now, some time ago, I came up with a response to my kids when they would get in that relentless pursuit of asking for things. Parents, you know how it is when you walk into the grocery store and all of a sudden they think you should buy them everything. Poppy, will you buy me this? Poppy, will you buy me that? Poppy, can we get this? Poppy, can I get this bag of candy that's bigger than my face and I'll eat the whole thing tonight? You know what I mean? Or you go into Target and you pass that one section. It doesn't matter what month it is. It can be August, but all of a sudden they think it's Christmas. Poppy, can we get this toy? Poppy, will you get me this toy? Poppy, this is a toy I've really been wanting for years. Poppy, I need this one. So what I did was I came up with this response, and by the way, my kids hate it. Every time I say it to them, they roll their eyes and walk away in disgust, and they know exactly what it means. But I'll say to them, I don't know, let me pray about it. And they know that means to take the candy bag that's as big as their face and to put it right back on the shelf where it belongs. And y'all, this worked just fine until one evening last week when Breck, our 3-year-old, just completely flipped the script on us. See, sometimes we'll do a boys' night, and on boys' night, we'll stay up a little later, we'll make some snacks, or we'll go to the store and get some snacks, and then we'll watch a movie together. He gets to pick the movie, so we watch a lot of Batman. And on this night, the girls were off doing their thing, and Breck said, Poppy, I've got an idea. He's always got an idea, and he puts his finger in it. I got an idea. He says, how about we stay up late and have boys' night? And I was like, dude, it's a school night. You have school in the morning. It's already almost your bedtime. So actually, you got to go upstairs and start getting ready for bed. You know what he said to me? No lie. Poppy, I'm going to pray about it. We're standing in our living room. He puts his hands on his hips. Exact words. I'm not making it up. He looks up to the ceiling. Jesus, you want me to stay up late with my Poppy tonight? He said, yes, Poppy. To which I responded, you win, go get your jammies on and let's watch a movie. Does God still speak to us today? See, I have to be honest with y'all. On a Thursday night, I was sitting in our entry room, and we have these 2 white chairs in our entry room and my bookcase, and I was sitting in that room, and I had this iPad sitting on my lap, and it's the place where I've written many of sermon. And on this night, it was sitting on my lap, and the blank screen is just staring at me, and the cursor is just doing that blinking. What are you going to say? What are you going to say? Because the truth is, that's exactly what I was thinking. What do I say to my people? What do I say on this last Sunday? I mean, I had the scripture picked out, the theme picked out a couple months ago. It wasn't that I didn't think about this prior to Thursday night. The truth is probably the opposite. I overthought it. But then I sat in that chair and thought, what do I say? What do I say to my people? And you know, when you don't know what to say and your phone's sitting next to you, well, you pick your phone up and you start scrolling and you watch cat videos, or you go to your email and you scroll down seeing if any new emails are going to upload. And when I went to do that, I accidentally hit the top left button, which was mailboxes, and it brought me to my email folders. And I came across a folder that I hadn't visited in quite some time. Y'all probably have different folders in your email, right? It's a way to organize your emails. And this folder that I visited was my encouraging emails folder. And if y'all don't have an encouraging emails folder, I highly recommend it. An encouraging emails folder for me is anytime you read that email and it makes you feel good inside, it gives you the warm fuzzies and it makes you smile, and then you respond to that person, and then you take that email and hit a button and move it over to the encouraging emails folder. And it's true, y'all, that on some days we need the great reminder of humility, that from dust we come and to dust we shall return. But then there's other days where you need to be reminded that you're created in God's image and you're filled with greatness. You're crammed with it. And here I am reading these encouraging emails. And you know what was so cool about it? Dozens of emails in this folder. Almost every single one of them, like over 90% of them, were from you. I spent the next hour and a half on Thursday night reading these emails. And I have to be honest with you, it was the last few days have been emotional, but this was like an emotional moment. This was a moment for me. I'm sure my family thought I was a bit crazy. Here I am crying and laughing. Right in the middle of this, a dear friend of mine calls me. Phone sitting next to me. I look at it. It's like, man, I got to call her back. Rings again. Man, all right, I think I need to take this call. She might need something. Hello? Hey, what's going on with you? Are you all right? Yeah, why? She said, I don't know. I just had this sudden and powerful urge that I needed to pray for you in this moment. And I cannot tell you all how sustaining that was for me in that moment. Does God still speak to us today? According to you all, God is still speaking. Because not only in these emails was it like encouraging, nice words about me, but you all shared your stories with me in these emails. And I have to tell you, it has been one of my greatest joys, one of my greatest honors in being one of your pastors is that you shared your stories with me. And as I read through these emails, it was story after story about God calling you to step into your fear and take a new step in life. And it was story after story of God's love creeping in on you at the strangest time and changing you and what that was like for you. It was story after story of God inviting you to step out of some form or some system of injustice and to embrace God's love for all people and what that moment was like for you. It was stories about your experiences with a quiet kind of grace that grabs you in the middle of the night and says, I got you. I got you. You shared with me incredible stories of pain and loss and anger and a longing for God to speak some sort of word into your life. You shared with me stories about life leaving you so dry and thirsty, only to in that moment experience the living God who provided overflowing water. And you were like, where in the world did that come from? Wasn't expecting that. And I also have to admit to you all that reading some of those stories, man, they were just weird. Y'all told some weird stories. They were odd stories. And yet, they were so real to you because God was somehow, somewhere in the midst of that. Does God still speak to us today? You know, there's a really odd story. Speaking of odd stories, a really odd story early in the Bible, in the second book of the Bible called Exodus, and it comes from Exodus chapter 17. And if you're a bit fuzzy on the book of Exodus, it begins with God calling Moses through a series of events to go to Pharaoh. The king Pharaoh was holding the Israelites, the Hebrew people, in slavery and captivity in Egypt. And God says, I want you to go tell Pharaoh to let my people go. So after some reluctance, Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, let my people go. Long story short, they're traveling out of Egypt and they're traveling through the wilderness on their way to the promised land. But while they're wandering in the wilderness, things aren't going well. They're thirsty and there's no water. And they start saying to Moses, Moses, why would you do this to us? Why would you bring us here? We're going to die out here. There's no water. We're thirsty. Not only are we going to die, our kids are going to die, and our livestock is going to die. Why'd you do this to us? We were better off in Egypt. And the text says, Moses cries out to God. And God always hears the cries. And Moses says, God, I don't know what to do with these people. They want to kill me now. What am I going to do? The Lord said to Moses, go ahead of the people and take some of the elders of Israel with you. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile and go. I will be standing there in front of you on the rock at Oreb. Strike the rock and water will come out of it so that the people may drink. And let's just pause there for just a moment. Imagine with me you are Moses. No, God, I don't want to do that. It sounds to me like this is some kind of setup. You want me to go with my people, and you want me to take some stick and hit a rock, and you say water's going to come out? Yeah, God, is the joke on me? Because this doesn't sound right. Moses comes to his senses. It only took one verse. Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. He called the place Massah and Meribah because the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, is the Lord among us or not? It's kind of a weird story, isn't it? And if you're like me, you're asking the very obvious question, did it work? I mean, when he hit the rock, did water come out? The rest of Exodus is just about them wandering and God being really, really patient and gracious with them. We don't hear about that rock until almost another 1,000 years later by a guy by the name of the Apostle Paul in this letter called the Corinthians. He's speaking to the church in Corinth over 1,000 years later. So we're in the New Testament now. And Paul is telling his people this story, and he's reminding them of their story, and he goes all the way back to their ancestors wandering in the wilderness. And here's how he says it, 1 Corinthians chapter 10. He says, for I do not want you to be ignorant of the fact, brothers and sisters, that our ancestors were all under the cloud and that they all passed through the sea, the traveling out of Egypt. They all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. What? Christ? Jesus was that rock? I mean, how is it possible Jesus wasn't born until centuries later? But see, Paul is reading another story in that story because Paul finds Jesus everywhere. That Christ was present in that moment, providing for them water when they needed it most. Jesus was sustaining. Paul says Jesus was that rock. Kind of weird, isn't it? Or maybe it's not so weird. Because the truth is, so many of you have had these really profound spiritual experiences, and you don't always know how to name them. But you know that they were so real. They changed you. They changed the way you saw things. Is it possible for you to read another story in your story? That in those moments you were bumping up against the living, life-giving Christ. That you were drinking from the rock, not knowing exactly what the rock or who the rock was. And it's true, isn't it? We are being sustained and carried in ways that we cannot even articulate. It's why you'll read the phrase so often in scriptures, especially by the Apostle Paul, the mystery of Christ. The mystery of Christ. The mystery of Christ. And it's true. On the spiritual path, you will encounter a God who asks you to do things that you do not understand. And you won't be able to predict the outcome, but keep following that path, because on that path, with this voice, you might just encounter water, not just for yourself, but for others as well. So, my brothers and sisters, if I can give you 4 things that I urge you to keep doing, and then I want to give you a bit of a confession. But first, 4 things I urge you to keep doing, and I'll keep them simple. Number 1, keep extending grace to others even when they disappoint you. Number 2, keep courageously opening your heart to God and others, even when you're not sure it's going to work, even when your fear tells you the exact opposite. And number 3, keep wonder close by. Embrace the mystery of God working and providing in your life, and you do not need neatly wrapped intellectual and theological answers for the deepest mysteries of Christ. And number 4, keep moving toward the voice that's inviting you to hit the rock. And hit that rock as hard as you can, even if it makes you look ridiculous. Because God has so often experienced beyond the usual, beyond the typical, beyond the expected. And now it's time for a confession. Because every good last sermon must have an honest confession. And every honest confession must be read, not merely spoken. And sometimes you got to go old school with some actual paper. My St. Luke's brothers and sisters, I have done everything I could to bring my best self into this community. I have tried to be a voice of hope and healing and truth to you year after year, Sunday after Sunday. I've tried to point to God's redemptive movement in the world every time we gathered. I've tried to open my heart, my life to you even when it was really difficult and I didn't know how you'd respond. I always tried to share with you my shadow sides, my biggest doubts, my deepest struggles. And you have always been kind. You have always been gracious. I've tried my best to pay attention to God's voice and respond to it, even when God said silly things like, go hit that rock. I've tried to always lead you to the life-giving waters, and yes, there were indeed moments where I stumbled, moments where I fell, moments where I simply got it wrong. And you have always been kind. You have always been gracious. I have tried to make things right whenever I wronged you, to keep my side of the street clean. Over the years, I've called some of you and met you for coffee asking for your forgiveness. And you have always been kind. You have always been gracious. I stood at the threshold with you all many times, through pain and heartache and through joy and celebration. We have stood together on many occasions, wide-eyed and filled with wonder. Many of you have whispered along the way, it feels like I'm just getting started. Yes. With all these years here, all these experiences, all those sermons, I confess to you today that's exactly what I feel. What so many of you have felt. It feels like I'm just getting started. I feel like the world is as big and wide and open as ever. And I confess to you today, I know what Jesus was talking about when he said he came to give the most abundant kind of life. And as we've learned from the extensive research on aspen trees and groves and roots, rarely is there just one aspen tree. By their nature, aspens are not a solitary tree. Their roots spread below the earth's surface and spring to life others to form a group. Aspens grow as a community. They are interconnected by their roots and share nutrients with each other. We've been together for a number of years, and now we're parting in some ways, but forever our roots will be entangled, and I celebrate that. And today I stand in your midst, and I confess to you, and at Tammy's request, I speak on behalf of her as well. We are filled with joy and gratitude for this church. And we hope you experience so much grace and peace in the days ahead. Your brother, Ryan.